For 10 years, Theodore Walsh fixed what Scarlett Horne broke. Every defective engine her company quietly buried, the ones that failed emissions, the ones that cracked under pressure, the ones that would have ended careers if they had surfaced, ended up in crates at the back of his garage. No press, no paper trail, just Theodore, his tools, and a daughter who fell asleep to the sound of wrenches. He never complained. He kept every record. And when Scarlett Horne's empire finally collapsed under the weight of its own lies, she had nowhere left to go but his door. He fixed everything she broke. Now she needs him to fix the one thing she cannot: her truth. The town of Dunbar, Ohio, did not ask much of the people who lived there. It asked for work and patience, and the good sense to know when something was worth keeping. Walsh Auto Repair sat at the corner of Maple and 9th Street, a one-story building with a green tin roof that rattled faintly in wind, and a hand-painted sign that had never been replaced since the day Theodore hung it. The paint had faded to a soft olive, and the letters listed slightly to the left, but Theodore had never bothered to fix it. There were more important things to fix. He was up before 6 every morning. The alarm was unnecessary. His body had learned the hour the way a mechanic learns an engine, from the inside out, by feel. He made coffee in the same chipped mug he had used for 9 years, dressed in the dark, and then went down the hall to his daughter's room. Luna was 6 years old, with a tangle of dark curls that fought the hairbrush every single morning, and a stuffed bear she called Bolt that went everywhere she went. Theodore would sit on the edge of her bed, work the brush gently through the curls, and she would wake up slowly, eyes still half closed, one hand already reaching for Bolt. "Horn trucks today?" she asked one morning, not looking up, the way children ask questions they already know the answer to. Theodore tied the last strand of her hair. Probably. He dropped her at Grace Tillman's house at 6:30. Grace was 53, lived 2 blocks away, and had worked as his bookkeeper since the second year he opened. She had no children of her own, and had quietly filled a space in Luna's life that neither of them had ever named out loud. Then Theodore walked back to the shop, unlocked the rolling gate, and began his day. The Horne Automotive Group occupied a 40-story glass tower in downtown Columbus, 40 miles east of Dunbar. Scarlett Horne had taken the company from her father at 31, and had spent the 5 years since then building it into something her father would not have recognized. She was at her desk by 7:30 every morning, in a black blazer, with the quarterly projections already loaded on the screen behind her. Meetings did not start late. Decisions did not linger. The word around the company was that Scarlett Horne had 2 speeds forward, and faster. But every Thursday, a gray cargo van with Horne Parts Division, stenciled on the side panel, drove the 40 miles to Dunbar and stopped at Walsh Auto Repair. The driver, always a different one, always quiet, would unload between 3 and 7 engine units from the back, leave a small sealed envelope on top of the stack, and drive away. The envelope contained cash and a single sheet with a parts return reference number. No signature beyond a rubber stamp. No official invoice. Just the engines and the envelope, and the understanding that Theodore Walsh would not ask questions. He had learned not to ask questions. That lesson had been expensive. Grace Tillman watched him receive the delivery that Thursday morning from the doorway of the shop, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She was holding a manila folder. "The vate they sent last week," she said, when the van had gone. "I pulled the manufacturing code. It's the 3rd unit from the same production batch in 5 months." Theodore crouched beside the nearest engine, pressing 2 fingers along the cylinder wall. He did not answer right away. "I know," he said finally. "I labeled the other 2 the same way." Grace opened the folder and held it out. Inside were photographs, handwritten analysis notes, and a printed sheet with production codes highlighted in yellow marker. She had been doing this quietly, on her own time, because she was the kind of person who believed that things should be documented even when the documentation served no immediate purpose. Theodore took the folder and looked at it for a long moment. "Put it with the others," he said. He had said those same words hundreds of times over 10 years, and Grace had always complied, and neither of them had ever discussed what the others were for. But they both knew. The back storage room of Walsh Auto Repair held 5 large filing cabinets, each one painted a particular shade of pale blue that Theodore had chosen, without knowing exactly why. The color was almost the same as the inside of the break room at the Horn Automotive Engineering Facility, where he had worked for 12 years, the room where he had eaten lunch and written reports, and once, on a Tuesday in March 11 years ago, had argued with a man named Oliver Marsh about a structural fault in the HX4 engine series. Theodore Walsh had been a senior engine design engineer at Horn Automotive before he had been a garage owner. He had been good at the work, not good in the way that earns compliments in hallways, but good in the quiet, precise way that keeps machines from failing. The HX4 had been largely his. The combustion chamber geometry, the valve timing sequence, the particular alloy composition in the cylinder wall, he had worked on those problems for 2 years, and when the engine went to production, his name had been on the internal design documents. Then his wife, Claire, had been killed in a car accident on a Tuesday evening in November. Luna was 8 months old. Theodore had taken emergency leave, then extended leave, and when he finally surfaced again, the company had restructured. Oliver Marsh, who had been deputy director of the product division, had quietly removed Theodore's name from the patent filings and reassigned design credit to a team that Theodore had never led. By the time Theodore understood what had happened, he had no money for lawyers and no energy to fight. He opened the garage instead. The first Horn delivery had arrived 14 months later. He had understood immediately what it meant. The engines being quietly outsourced to a small-town repair shop were not standard wear and tear returns. They were units with systematic faults, the same fault he had flagged in a technical report in the spring before his leave, a report that Oliver Marsh had signed for and then made disappear. Someone inside Horn was using Theodore's garage as a disposal route, pulling the defective units from the internal inventory before any regulatory audit could flag them, and dispersing them to third-party shops, where they would be quietly repaired or scrapped, with no paper trail leading back to the company. Theodore was the third-party shop. He had the technical knowledge to handle the units without asking the wrong questions, and he had the need for money, and Oliver Marsh knew both of those things very well. So Theodore had taken the envelopes. He had done the work, and every single time, he had written down everything: the unit code, the batch number, the fault pattern, the date received, the cost of materials, his analysis of the root cause, and he had filed it in the blue cabinets, 1 folder per delivery, organized by year. He had done it because he was a person who did not throw away data, and because somewhere beneath the exhaustion of raising a small child alone and running a small business alone, he had always believed, without quite articulating it, that the data would matter someday. He sat at his workbench late the night after Grace brought him the new folder, with Luna asleep down the hall and a single lamp burning over the cabinet row. The stools in the shop were old, and the floor was cold, and the overhead fluorescent had been flickering for 3 weeks because he kept forgetting to change it. He ran his thumb across the tabs of the current year's folders. 6 years of batch numbers that matched the fault series he had documented in the report Oliver Marsh had buried. 10 years of evidence that the problem had never been fixed, only hidden. He did not feel righteous about it. He felt tired in the particular way of a man who has been carrying weight that was never his to carry, and who has never once set it down, because setting it down would mean abandoning the only honest thing he had left. He closed the cabinet and went to check on Luna. The news broke on a Wednesday morning in October. Theodore was replacing a brake caliper on a customer's truck when Grace came out of the office holding her phone at arm's length, as though the screen contained something that required distance. 340,000 vehicles, she said. 7 accidents, 2 of them serious. Theodore set down the caliper. He already knew which vehicles. He already knew which engine series. He already knew because he had been writing it down for 10 years. He looked up at the row of blue filing cabinets visible through the open door of the storage room, and for the first time in a very long while, he let himself feel what he had been carrying. Inside the glass tower in Columbus, the collapse was not slow. It happened the way structural failures happen invisibly for a long time, and then all at once. The recall announcement triggered an investigation. The investigation surfaced internal communications, and within 72 hours, the stock had dropped 60%, and the phones had stopped ringing in the ordinary way and started ringing in the other way, the way that meant lawyers. Scarlett Horn sat in her office at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, with the lights off and the city below her, going about its business, as though nothing particular had happened. She had read every document her legal team had sent in the last 3 days. She had read the recall filings, the accident reports, the preliminary investigation summary, and she had read this was the part that kept returning to her a memo from 2012 written by a senior engineer named Theodore Walsh, warning the product division about a fault in the HX4 combustion chamber wall that could cause progressive cracking under sustained load conditions. The memo had been received and signed for by Oliver Marsh. It had never reached her desk. Her attorney, a compact, precise woman named Diana Cole, had called that afternoon with a single pointed assessment. To survive what was coming, Scarlett needed an independent technical witness, someone who could demonstrate, from outside the company's own record-keeping, that the fault was structural and long-standing, and that the decision to conceal it had been made below the executive level. The only person outside Horn Automotive who had handled the relevant engines and who had the technical background to speak to their fault patterns was Theodore Walsh. Diana had found his name in a parts return reference file that one of the associates had pulled during document review. The reference was years old and led nowhere except to a repair shop in a small town 40 miles west. The next morning, Scarlett Horn drove herself to Dunbar. She had not driven herself anywhere in 4 years. Theodore was lying beneath a pickup truck when the black sedan pulled into his lot. He heard the door open and close, and the particular sound of heels on concrete, not the uncertain tap of someone unfamiliar with garages, but a deliberate, measured sound. He slid out from beneath the truck and stood up. She looked different than the photograph in the business section. The blazer was the same quality, but the posture was not. Her hair was done, but not recently. There were shadows under her eyes that suggested the kind of fatigue that sleep does not fix. "Theodore Walsh," she said. It was not a question. "I know who you are," he said. He picked up a rag from the workbench and wiped his hands. He did not extend the hand. 10 years I've been receiving your company's broken engines. Just never had anybody call them that out loud." The sentence landed the way he intended it to, not as an attack, but as a fact. Scarlett Horn had come prepared for many things. She had not come prepared for a man who did not need to be impressed by her. She told him what she needed: a technical witness, an independent voice. Documentation showing that the fault was designed in, not decided in that it predated her tenure, that it was structural, that someone had known about it and concealed it deliberately. Theodore listened without interrupting. Then he said, "What are you offering?" She told him a number. He looked out the open garage door to where Grace Tillman was walking Luna in slow circles in the lot, the little girl's hand in hers, Bolt tucked under her other arm. "That's not what I need," he said. "Then what?" He turned back and looked at her not unkindly, but with the directness of someone who had spent a decade in a room with the truth and could not pretend otherwise. "I need you to sit down and look at 10 years of records with me," he said. "And I need you to tell me, when you're done, whether you actually knew." She did not answer immediately. The moment held. Then Luna pushed open the side door from the lot and looked between them with the cheerful curiosity of a 6-year-old who has not yet learned that some rooms are tense. "Daddy," she said, "is she here to get a car fixed, or did she break one?" Theodore's mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile. "Go back with Grace, sweetheart." Luna studied Scarlett for one more moment with enormous dark eyes, then retreated. The door swung shut. The blue filing cabinets took up the entire back wall of the storage room and a portion of the side wall. Scarlett stood in the doorway for a moment before she stepped inside. Theodore opened the first cabinet, the one labeled with the year that the first delivery had arrived. He pulled a folder and set it on the work table. Photographs, handwritten sheets, printed analysis forms, every item dated, every item signed. "This one came in a Tuesday in February," he said. "Batch code 7743 Echo. Combustion chamber wall. Hairline fracture consistent with the fault pattern I documented in the internal report I wrote in March of the year before." He set his finger on a line of the handwritten notes. "I recognized it the first time I saw it. I had designed that engine. I knew exactly which tolerance had been compromised." Scarlett leaned in. She could read the batch codes. She had spent 3 days reading batch codes. "This code," she said slowly, "this is in the recall list. Most of them are." He moved to the next cabinet. I have records going back 10 years. Every unit, every batch code, every fault analysis. All of it cross-referenced to the original HX4 design file, which I kept a personal copy of because it was my work. He said it without bitterness. It was simply true. Scarlett sat down on the old stool beside the work table. She picked up one of the folders from the middle years and began reading. Theodore did not rush her. He stood at the other end of the table with his arms crossed and let her work through it at her own pace. It took almost 2 hours. By the time she set the last folder down, her expression had changed in ways that were difficult to name. She looked like someone who had been carrying a version of a story for a long time and had just been handed a different version, one that matched the facts in ways hers had not. "Oliver received your original report," she said. "Before your leave." "Yes." And then the engines started coming here. 14 months after I left. First delivery was 3 engines. Same batch series. Same fault. He was sending them to you because, she stopped, because I had the skills to handle them without asking the right questions, Theodore said, and because he knew I needed the money, and because if anything ever surfaced, a garage owner who had been receiving cash payments off the books would be a much worse witness than a CFO. Scarlett was quiet for a long time. Through the storage room wall, they could hear the faint sound of Luna singing something tuneless to herself in the lot. "How old is she?" Scarlett asked. 6. A silence with weight in it. "I'm sorry," Scarlett said. Theodore looked at her. "Are you apologizing to Luna or to me?" She did not answer right away, and that, Theodore thought, was at least an honest response. She stayed in Dunbar. There was nowhere else to go. The media had her building surrounded, and her attorney had advised her not to return until the preliminary filing was complete. She took a room at the motel at the end of the main road and came to the shop every morning at 8. They worked through the records together, Theodore and Scarlett and Grace, building a timeline that went from his original report in 2012 to the most recent delivery the previous month. Grace cross-referenced the batch codes against the published recall list with the careful focus of a person who has always believed that numbers, properly kept, will eventually tell the truth. On the second morning, Scarlett picked up a socket wrench from the bench and held it at the wrong angle. Theodore did not say anything. He reached over and repositioned her hand, not demonstrating, just correcting, the way he would with anyone new to the shop. She registered the adjustment without comment. She was not accustomed to being corrected without explanation, but she was beginning to understand that some things in this building were communicated differently. Luna started calling her the lady with the good coat and dirty hands, which was accurate. On the 4th afternoon, Scarlett asked him, quietly, whether he had ever considered coming forward earlier. When Luna was 3, he said, "I had maybe $400 in a savings account and a box of records that I would have needed a law firm to present properly. Oliver Marsh had a full legal department. I did the math. He was not asking for sympathy. He was providing data. That's the thing about systems like the one you ran," he said. He was not looking at her, just working the calibration gauge on the engine in front of him. They don't have to threaten you directly. They just have to make the alternative impossible. And then they wait. She did not say anything for a while. "I never knew about any of this," she said finally. "I want you to know that. I know it doesn't change." "I believe you," Theodore said. He put down the gauge. "That might be the worst part of it. Not that you knew, that the system was organized specifically so that you wouldn't have to." She sat with that for the rest of the afternoon. Oliver Marsh called her that evening at 7:45. She was sitting in the parking lot of the motel with the phone on speaker, watching the street. "I know where you are," he said. "I know what you're doing." His voice carried the particular steadiness of a man who had spent a career maintaining control and believed, still, that control was recoverable. "Don't let that mechanic destroy what we built." "What you built," Scarlett said. "What we built together." A pause. "Think carefully." She ended the call. By morning, the story had shifted. A newswire had published a short item, sourced anonymously, describing Theodore Walsh as a repair shop owner with a history of receiving unreported cash payments from a major automotive company, suggesting that his anticipated testimony was financially compromised. The item was short, but it circulated. By 10 o'clock, 2 of his regular customers had called Grace to cancel their appointments. Theodore read the item on his phone standing in the driveway of the shop. Then he put the phone in his pocket and went back inside and started on the day's work. Grace found him an hour later. "What do you want to do?" "Keep working," he said. Scarlett arrived at 9 and told him directly what Oliver's team had done the tax records from 2019 that showed he had underreported income from the Kelpermans. Not fraud in any meaningful sense, just a man who could not afford a careful accountant during the worst year of his business. But on paper it could be framed as something worse. "You should know," she said. "If this gets worse, if he finds more, then it gets worse," Theodore said. "I didn't do anything wrong. I did something messy, because my life was messy. There's a difference." He looked at her. "If you need to find a different witness," he said, "I understand. I'm not asking you to take this on for me." Scarlett was quiet for a moment. Then, "He's doing this because he's afraid of you. A man with 40 lawyers doesn't go digging through a garage owner's tax records because he's confident." Theodore did not answer. That evening, Luna asked him about the news item. She had heard Grace talking. She was 6, and she understood more than adults usually expected. "People said bad things about you," she said. "Not asking, reporting." Theodore sat down on the porch steps so they were the same height. "Some people did," he said, "but I didn't do a bad thing. I did a slow thing. Sometimes the right thing takes a long time, and while you're waiting, it can look wrong to people who aren't waiting with you." Luna thought about this carefully. "Is Scarlett waiting with you?" she asked. "I think she's starting to," Theodore said. It was Grace who found it. She had been going through the 2016 folders, the middle years, the ones Theodore had organized most densely, and she found it at 11:47 at night, when Theodore had already gone home, and she was supposed to have locked up an hour ago. She called him from the shop phone. "Come back," she said, "right now." The folder she showed him was from the 3rd week of March in 2016. Inside was a standard delivery receipt for a batch of 6 engine units, and stapled to the back of the receipt, in a plain white envelope, was a handwritten note on Horn Automotive notepaper. The handwriting was Oliver Marsh's. Theodore had seen it on enough internal memos to recognize it without question. The note read, "Handle this. Do not log it in the system." OM, the batch code on the receipt, matched a unit from a 2022 accident report. A man named Dennis Greer, 41 years old, 2 children, had been driving a vehicle with that engine series when the fault caused the engine to lock under highway load. He had survived. He had not walked again. Theodore read the note twice. He set it flat on the workbench and looked at it under the lamp. Scarlett arrived within 15 minutes. She stood at the workbench and read the note and did not say anything for a full minute. "He used your shop as a vault," she said quietly, "because he knew you would keep everything safe and never open it." "He thought I didn't have the key," Theodore said. The call to Diana Cole went out at midnight. By morning, the legal team was preparing the submission package for the federal investigation 10 years of batch-coded repair records, the original 2012 design report, the 2016 note, and Theodore's formal technical analysis, linking every unit he had received to the fault pattern he had identified a decade earlier. Oliver Marsh arrived at Walsh Auto Repair the following Tuesday morning. He came alone, without an assistant. Without a car service, he drove himself in a silver sedan and parked in the lot with the neatness of a man who still believed in the appearance of order. He was wearing a suit that cost more than a month of Theodore's earnings, and his expression was the expression of someone preparing to negotiate. Theodore was at the workbench. He did not stand up when Oliver walked in. Oliver made the offer without preamble. He was precise about it, as he was precise about everything: a specific sum, a specific ask, the note from 2016, and Theodore's agreement to characterize the deliveries as routine contracted work rather than off-book disposal. In exchange, the tax issue would disappear and the news item would retract. Theodore listened to all of it. Then he said, "Do you know the name Dennis Greer?" Oliver said nothing. 41 years old, Theodore said. 2 kids. He was driving a vehicle with an engine from the batch your note came with. He didn't die. He can't walk. He picked up the calibration gauge from the bench and turned it in his hands, not doing anything with it, just holding it. I read the local paper. I read it every week. I have for 10 years. I have a habit of keeping track of things people think nobody's watching. Oliver tried once more. You cannot win against my legal. Get out of my shop, Theodore said. His voice did not change. I have a customer coming in at 10. Oliver Marsh stood in the center of Walsh Auto Repair and looked at the room, the old tools on their pegboard hooks, the faded calendar on the wall, the small framed photograph of Luna at age 3 taped next to the parts phone, the blue filing cabinets, visible through the open storage room door. He looked at all of it and understood something that his position and his lawyers and his 40 years of cultivated leverage had never prepared him to face. A man who has nothing left to protect is a man you cannot threaten. He left without another word. Scarlett had been standing at the side of the building. She had heard everything. When Theodore came out, she was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed and her eyes on the middle distance. He'll try something else, she said. Probably, Theodore said. It won't change what's in the cabinets. The federal hearing was held on a Thursday morning. Theodore arrived in khaki trousers and a white button-down shirt, not a suit, just clean clothes, pressed with some care. He carried the submission package in a standard banker's box, the kind that cost $3 at the office supply store. He sat at the witness table and he told the truth. He told it from the beginning, the original design work, the 2012 report, the restructuring, the first delivery, the 10 years of records, the note from 2016. He had organized his testimony the way he organized his maintenance logs, chronologically, clearly, without embellishment. When one of the committee members asked him why he had maintained such thorough documentation over a decade, he paused for a moment before answering. Because I was an engineer at that company, he said. Engineers don't discard data. It was a quiet sentence. It described 10 years. Diana Cole presented the technical analysis that afternoon, the batch code cross-references, the timeline from 2012 to the present, the original fault report, and the note from 2016. Oliver Marsh's own handwriting on Horn Company notepaper, instructing that a known defective batch be kept off the official log. When Oliver Marsh took the witness seat the following morning, he had 4 attorneys with him and a prepared statement that was 47 pages long. By the second hour of questioning, his account of who had known what and when had begun to contradict itself in ways that became increasingly difficult to reconcile. The gaps in his record-keeping, set against the completeness of Theodore's, told a story that 47 pages could not revise. The outcome came 3 weeks later. Oliver Marsh was referred for criminal prosecution on charges of evidence, concealment, and intentional safety violation cover-up. Scarlett Horn was formally removed from the list of primary subjects. In the investigation report's technical appendix, Theodore Walsh was cited as the provider of critical independent documentation without which the full scope of the concealment could not have been established. He read that sentence once, then folded the report and put it on the shelf above the workbench, next to the framed photograph of Luna. The following month passed, the way most months passed at Walsh Auto Repair. The work was steady. A few new customers had come in after the news coverage, people who had read the story and felt that a shop run by a man like that was probably a shop that would not overcharge them, which was accurate. The old customers returned. The calendar on the wall was filled with oil changes and alignments, and a transmission job that Theodore was actually looking forward to. Grace taped a sheet of paper to the front of the blue filing cabinets. It read, Completed, 2014 through 2024. She had found a blue marker that was almost exactly the same shade as the cabinets, which pleased her. Scarlett came on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks before she was due back in Columbus to finalize the company's restructuring process. She wore a coat Theodore had not seen before, softer than her usual things, something she might have bought in Dunbar rather than packed from home. She was carrying a manila envelope. She gave it to him without a speech. Inside was a legal document, several pages, formal in structure. His name appeared in the first paragraph. The document was a rights restoration agreement, executed by the reconstituted Horn Automotive Board, returning attribution credit on the HX4 engine series to its original designer. His name would be restored in the patent records and the engineering archive. Theodore read the first page, then the second. He stood at the workbench for a long moment with the document in both hands. "I can't give back 10 years," Scarlett said. "I can give back your name." He folded the document carefully along its original crease and tucked it into the breast pocket of his work shirt. He did not say anything immediately. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of a room where something had been set down after a long time of being carried. "Did you learn anything?" he asked. "From all of this?" She thought about it. She gave it real consideration, the way she had given the blue cabinet folders real consideration, and he respected that about her. "I learned," she said finally, "that the people who say the least are usually the ones holding the most." He nodded a single, slow nod that meant the answer was sufficient. Luna came running from the back of the lot, where she had been drawing something with chalk on the old concrete pad. She hit Theodore at waist height without slowing down, arms wrapping his midsection, and then looked up at Scarlett with the candid assessment of a 6-year-old. "You're leaving today?" she said. "I am," Scarlett said. She crouched down to Luna's level, which was something she had not done easily 3 weeks ago. "But I'll remember this place." Luna considered this with the gravity she brought to most important things. "Remember it right," she said. "This is where my dad fixes cars. It's not where people drop off broken things and forget about them." Scarlett looked at her for a moment, and then at Theodore, and then back at the little girl. "I know," she said quietly. "I know the difference now." Theodore walked her to the car. The afternoon light was low and gold across the green tin roof. She shook his hand, not the elaborate gesture of a deal being sealed, just the ordinary gesture of one person acknowledging another. He watched the black car pull out of the lot and turn east, back toward Columbus and the glass tower and the work of rebuilding things that had been broken for a long time. Then he went back inside. For 10 years, Scarlett Horn had used the back lot of Walsh Auto Repair as a place to set down the things she did not want to carry. What she had never understood was that Theodore Walsh had picked up every single one of those things, not because he had to, not because it benefited him, not because he planned any particular use for them, but because he was the kind of man who did not walk past something broken without taking note of where the damage was, and what it meant, and whether anyone would ever be able to use it to find the truth. He had been right that it would matter someday. He had just never known how patient someday would require him to be.